The morning sun glinted off the polished marble of the talent circuit's west entrance, its reflection sharp enough to make Ernest Rafford squint. He had arrived early, he always did. Not out of anxiety, but discipline. You don't spend decades waking before sunrise in the army without it becoming part of your bones. Ernest stood still for a moment, adjusting his grip on the worn handle of the violin case that had traveled more miles than most men. His other hand clutched a folded paper creased from opening and refolding. It was a registration slip printed from an email sent by someone named Jessica N., a name he didn't know from a system he barely understood. He wore what he had worn for years, a faded military jacket, boots dulled from age, and a hat with the insignia of Echo Company 1st Battalion, though most of the stitching had frayed into mystery. The younger ones couldn't read it anymore. He didn't mind. He knew what it said. That was enough. The people lined up outside Studio 9 in downtown Los Angeles looked nothing like him. Sequins, feathers, fur-lined jackets in July. Some tuned guitars. Others rehearsed dance steps or vocal runs. It was a circus of hope. Ernest didn't come here chasing hope. He came here carrying 8 names. At precisely 8:27 a.m., Ernest reached the gate. "This is a private event," said a man in a security vest. His voice was sharp, mechanical. His mirrored sunglasses caught Ernest's reflection, but offered nothing back. "I think you're looking for the shelter, 2 blocks down." Ernest didn't speak. He just held out the paper extended between 2 gloved fingers. The gloves thin, now a few seams split. The man didn't take it, didn't even glance. "This isn't a place to panhandle," he added. "Let's not make this uncomfortable." Before Ernest could reply, not that he had planned to, another voice cut in. "I've got it." She was young, maybe 25, ponytail tied high, a lanyard crowded with badges hanging from her neck. Walkie-talkie clutched in her hand, like it weighed more than she did. Her name tag read, "Zoe, Talent Intake Team." "Mr. Rafford," she asked. He nodded once. "You came in from East Oakland, right?" Another nod. She smiled. It wasn't pity. That mattered. "Sorry about earlier. Security doesn't always check the back-end list." "Come on, we've got you." She didn't ask what he was playing, didn't ask why he looked like someone who didn't belong. She just took the registration slip from his hand, delicate brief contact, and let him inside. The building was colder than it looked. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Tile floors echoed every step. Performers passed by like parades. A kid in a lion suit offered him a donut. A woman in tap shoes tapped rhythms against the hallway wall. A pair of twins rehearsed synchronized movements with military precision and Broadway flair. Nobody looked at him twice. That was fine. Zoe guided him past a holding area, then to a quiet corridor with 4 folding chairs and a table covered in bottled water. "We're running about 40 minutes behind," she said. "But I'll make sure you're seen." She started to walk away, then paused. "Do you need anything? Water snack?" He shook his head. She nodded, then disappeared around a corner. He sat. The violin case rested against his knee like a sleeping dog, loyal and silent. He didn't open it. Not yet. He never opened it in front of strangers, not until it was time. Outside the glass doors, Los Angeles pulsed on. Traffic groaned. Sirens passed like afterthoughts. But in here, in this chilled corridor, just off the main stage, time slowed. It had been 53 years since Ernest first made the promise. Mekong Delta, 1969. Under a sky heavy with rain and mosquitoes. 8 men around him, most barely 20, pretending they weren't terrified. Someone had whispered, "Play something, Rafford?" He had. A hymn. Maybe a lullaby. He couldn't remember which. They had listened. Just listened. In the middle of war, it was a rare thing to be still and feel human. And then came the ambush. By the time the medevac landed, only Ernest had breath left, and a cracked violin case patched with tape. Before they died, one by one, those 8 men gave him scraps, literal scraps on which they had written jokes, songs, messages, dreams, notes from a war no one sings about. He carried them in that violin case ever since. Never showed them. Never forgot them. He had worked odd jobs, played in subway stations, disappeared into the noise of a country that didn't ask about the men left behind. But he remembered. Always. That morning the stage wasn't calling to him. It was calling to them. As he sat in the hallway, another performer rehearsed a soulful rendition of Somewhere Over the Rainbow. The irony wasn't lost on Ernest. The rainbow for his brothers had never come. When Zoe returned, she said only 4 words. "They're ready for you." He didn't rise immediately. His knees ached had for decades, but that wasn't it. He placed a hand gently on the violin case. It didn't feel like an object. It felt like a memory ready to breathe. He stood, slow, deliberate, and followed Zoe down the corridor, every step heavier, not with nerves but with remembrance. As they reached the edge of the stage, Zoe turned to him and said, "I don't know what you're about to play, but I know it's going to matter." He didn't smile, didn't nod, just said softly, "It's not for them." She didn't ask who. She already knew. The hush of backstage was a strange comfort, thicker than the silence of sleep, but gentler than grief. Ernest Rafford stood just beyond the reach of the stage lights, eyes adjusting to the dim wing violin case still in hand. From the far end of the auditorium came faint cheers. A boy had just finished juggling flaming batons to a beat-mashed remix of Beethoven. The crowd had loved it, but Ernest wasn't here to be loved. He moved slowly to a folding chair in the corner. His boots creaked softly, the sound swallowed by the velvet curtains. Zoe stood nearby, clipboard in hand, eyes flicking from him to the curtain, then back. Her fingers twitched nervously near her walkie-talkie, but she didn't speak. That silence, that respectful pause, was something Ernest appreciated more than any polite word. "You've got about 10 minutes, she finally said. He nodded. 10 minutes. That was all he needed. With a breath steadying him like it once had in a jungle foxhole, he placed the violin case on his lap. The latch's old brass, dulled by time, opened with a creak that sounded like an old friend clearing its throat. Inside, nestled in red velvet, faded to rust brown, lay the dark walnut instrument, smooth where his fingers had rested for years, worn around the edges. It wasn't pristine. It had scars, like him. But it still knew how to speak. He didn't reach for the violin first. He reached beneath it. Folded flat, tucked carefully in the hidden compartment were the notes. Not sheet music, not chords or bars, but the voices of 8 men written in pencil ink blood and hope. The first was scrawled on the corner of an MRE wrapper. The plastic had yellowed. The handwriting, shaky slanted, was barely visible. "If I don't come back, tell Marisol I kept her photo in my helmet. Ortiz." Ernest traced the letters with his thumb. Next was a torn sleeve, jungle green ink, running from sweat and rain. "Play something happy for me. Not that sad crap. I want folks to smile when they hear my name." "Owens." He chuckled softly just once. "The third on the back of a ration log. I wrote a tune, Ernie. Not much, just 4 lines. Play it like you mean it." Briggs. Every scrap was a voice, a moment frozen, a man trying to outlive war by trusting someone else to carry his story forward. He lifted a stained pamphlet once passed out by a chaplain before a storm of mortars. The thin paper nearly tore in his hands. "Ernest, if you're reading this and I'm gone, you know what to do. We all believed in you, man. You've got the hands to carry us home." "Waters." His throat tightened. He closed his eyes. The smell of diesel rain and hot iron drifted through memory like smoke. He had never been the best musician, not in high school, not in the Army. He wasn't even part of the official band. He had just brought the violin with him because it reminded him of his grandfather who used to play gospel on Sunday afternoons. When command learned he could play, they let him use it during downtime. But it had become more than morale. It became a tether. A reminder they were still men, not uniforms, not targets. And when the ambush hit 2 weeks after the last song, when the only sound left was his own heartbeat and the ringing in his ears, he made a vow in the muck of the Mekong. If I make it out, I'll play for you back home, one by one, note by note, until someone hears you. He had returned stateside with a fractured leg, a blood-soaked jacket, and a violin case with a bullet hole. The doctors nearly tossed it, said it was contaminated. I told them, "That's the only thing clean I've got left," he muttered, and he kept it. For 53 years. No stage, no spotlight. Just late nights polishing the wood, restringing it with hands stiff from age, and memorizing the weight of each note left behind. His world moved on. Friends married. Grandchildren were born. Cities he once knew disappeared under concrete and strip malls. But the notes stayed. His silence wasn't forgetfulness. It was reverence. Now backstage 10 minutes before the world would finally listen, he read each scrap like scripture. Some were silly, some were solemn. One Curtis's was written on a napkin from a base camp mess. If we ever get back, you better play this on a big stage. No pressure. Ernest smiled. No pressure, huh? He murmured. He folded the scraps back into their place beneath the violin. His hands moved with the precision of ritual. This wasn't performance. It was communion. He rose in the bow slowly, the powder catching the air, like old dust coming to life. Tuned each string by ear. Checked the seams of the bridge, the chin rest. Then he just held it. The weight hadn't changed, but somehow tonight it felt right. A voice called through the curtain, "Mr. Rafford, we're ready for you." Zoe stepped forward. This time she held out her hand, not to help him walk, but in quiet solidarity. "You ready?" she asked softly. He looked at her. Saw something in her eyes, curiosity wrapped in reverence. She didn't know the war, but she knew loss. "I'm not here to win," he said. "I'm here to finish." She nodded. That was enough. He stood, violin in one hand, bow in the other. And behind the curtain, as the stage manager counted him down, Ernest Rafford closed his eyes. He wasn't alone. He never had been. The stage lights were blinding. Ernest Rafford stepped slowly into their heat, feeling the sweat begin to beat along the back of his neck. The audience beyond the footlights was a sea of shadows, hundreds of them, maybe more. He couldn't see faces, but he could feel them. The hush wasn't uncomfortable. It was reverent, like a room holding its breath. He stopped center stage. The violin hung in his left hand, the bow resting gently at his side. A judge leaned forward behind the long table near the front. A woman with silver hair, glasses low on her nose, and a clipboard in her lap. "Sir," she said gently, "would you like to tell us your name?" Ernest stepped up to the microphone, but he didn't touch it. He didn't need to. "My name is Ernest Rafford," he said. His voice was steady, not loud, but it carried. "I served in the United States Army. Echo Company, 1st Battalion. I'm not here to win. I'm here to finish something." Another judge, a younger man in a blazer, with a bright smile, blinked. "And what are you finishing, Mr. Rafford?" He looked out into the dark, then back down to the violin in his hands. 8 men I served with never made it home. Before they died, they left me their music unfinished, unplayed. I told them if I made it back, I'd let the world hear them. He raised the violin to his shoulder. There are 8 songs. They won't be long, but they are theirs. No one responded, and that was perfect. He closed his eyes and brought the bow to the strings. The first notes jumped out like startled birds, jittery, fast, full of a chaotic rhythm that stuttered and soared. It was Theo Briggs's piece. Theo, who always bounced his leg and cracked jokes in the middle of firefights, who claimed jazz was God's way of whistling. The tune was messy, full of runs that stumbled and picked themselves up, but it pulsed with life. Someone in the front row leaned forward. The second song slowed everything, a low, aching melody in a minor key. Ernest let the bow dip and rise like waves at dusk. This was for Manuel Ortiz. His harmonica had been a constant in the jungle, even when food wasn't. Ernest bent the pitch, subtly making the violin weep just slightly the way a harmonica does when played under a desert sky. The last note lingered just long enough to feel like someone reaching back from the dust. A sniffle sounded in the dark. Not loud, just enough. Number 3, LeVar Owens. Ernest let the music dance, upbeat, syncopated rhythmic like footfalls in puddles. LeVar had danced in the jungle even with a bullet in his shoulder. He once spun a full circle on a muddy trail just to make someone laugh. Ernest smiled through the piece. It wasn't polished, but it had joy. The violin nearly laughed with him. There was a single clap. Then it stopped, unsure if it was allowed. The fourth was a whisper of a song, barely there, almost afraid to exist. That was Benny Curtis's piece. Benny, who never spoke unless it was important, whose silences felt heavier than words. The melody Ernest played was like snow on a still lake, soft, cold, almost too delicate for an audience. You had to lean in to hear it, and they did. Even the judges had stopped shifting in their chairs. Fifth, Joel Harper, the poet sergeant. Ernest remembered the sonnet Joel had written on a folded combat map about a tree clinging to life in dry soil. He gave the song a slow, thoughtful rhythm built around long phrases that rose and fell like breath. His bow shook once in his hand, but the note didn't falter. Somewhere backstage, he knew Zoe was holding her breath. 6, Floyd. Give me something silly, he'd said once. Like if jazz met banjo at a pie contest. Ernest played ragtime with abandon. A little swing, a little slapstick. The notes hopped like fireflies. There was laughter this time, not mocking, but relieved. A soft wave of shared joy. Ernest bowed his head. That was for you, buddy, he whispered. 7, Curtis. This piece was dusk. Heavy boots in mud, a sigh before a final sleep. The melody dragged slightly like someone pausing before a grave. The silence between the notes was more important than the sound itself. Ernest drew it out gently, letting each rest say, what words couldn't. Then came the 8th, Lieutenant Dale Waters, the man who had seen too much, who had said to Ernest on a night of rain and fear, if I don't make it play something that reminds them we were human. Ernest didn't plan this one. He just let the bow move. It was quiet, honest, no showmanship, just melody that breathed like a man on his last morning. Something you'd play while watching the sun rise through a hospital window. The final note trembled on the string, unsure if it should end. Ernest let it stay. Then gently he let it go. Silence. A long silence. Not even the buzz of stage equipment interrupted it. Then someone stood, a man, balding, hand to his heart. Another rose, then another, until the whole auditorium, judges, technicians, audience members, even the next performers was standing. No cheers, no applause, just stillness, not for Ernest, but for the 8. He lowered the violin, stepped back to the mic. Now he said softly, they've been heard. Then he turned and walked off stage. Zoe waited behind the curtain, her eyes wide, her mouth just slightly open like she'd forgotten how to breathe. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She simply reached out and touched his arm. That was enough. That night, as the bus rumbled east along I-10, Ernest Rafford sat near the back, his coat pulled tight against the chill of the air conditioning. The violin case rested on his lap like it always had, but this time it felt lighter. Not because the memories were gone, but because the silence had finally been broken. No one on the bus recognized him. He was just another old man riding home with nothing but a weathered instrument and a far-off look. And that suited him just fine. Outside, the city lights gave way to the dark hills and distant ranch fences. They blurred into stars, and in those stars, Ernest could almost hear them. Briggs and Ortiz Owens and Harper Curtis, Floyd Benny and Waters, whistling, joking, nudging one another with invisible elbows. You did good, Ernie, said Dale's voice, low and gravel thick. We weren't forgotten, came Joel's whisper. About damn time, LeVar laughed. For once, Ernest didn't cry. He just leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the memory ride beside him. By morning, the world had changed. The call came from Zoe just after sunrise. She sounded out of breath. "Mr. Rafford," she said, trying to stay composed. "Your video, it's everywhere." He frowned, blinking against the light through his kitchen window. "What do you mean 2.3 million views?" "Overnight. It's on the front page of the app. People are tagging their uncles, their grandfathers. They're writing things like, 'I never knew my dad hummed that tune in Vietnam. I cried for a stranger and didn't know why.'" He didn't say anything at first, just let her words settle. "They're listening," she added quietly. "Really listening." By the end of the week, letters began to arrive. Some typed some handwritten in trembling cursive, most with return addresses he didn't recognize. Envelopes with black and white photos, young men in uniform arms slung around each other, laughing outside barracks or squinting under the sun in places no longer on any tourist map. One letter came with only a dog tag inside. The note was simple play for him too, if you ever can. His name was Walter. He liked music more than war. Ernest kept everyone, didn't reply to all. His hands were slower now, but he read each letter like it was a prayer someone had trusted him to carry. 2 weeks later, Zoe called again, this time, her voice more uncertain. "There's a school in Chicago, South Hall High. The music teacher saw your video. They want to name their music room after Echo Company." He didn't answer for several seconds. "They said most of their students don't know much about Vietnam, but now they want to write songs for people they'll never meet." He closed his eyes and whispered, "That's all I ever wanted." He went, not for applause, not for recognition, but because they needed the story. The auditorium was modest, clean bleachers, soft lights, a student-made banner that read, "Welcome, Mr. Rafford, let the music remember." He didn't bring the violin this time, just the notes. He stood before 24 students, their faces open and curious, and told them about Ortiz and his photo of Marisol, about the poem Harper wrote by flashlight, about how Benny never spoke, but once carved a joke into his helmet. He told them about how music doesn't always come from talent. Sometimes it comes from duty, from memory, from love. When he finished, a girl with braces raised her hand. "Why did they write those notes to you?" He smiled, his voice low. "Because I had the violin. But more than that, because I promised. And sometimes that's the only instrument that matters." A tall boy stood up, headphones slung around his neck. "Will you play again?" Ernest paused. The room was silent. Then he said no. Some song, when played once, are finally complete. That afternoon, they unveiled a small plaque beside the new music room. It read "The Echo Room," dedicated to the 8 whose songs were heard at last. Beneath it, in gentle serif font, was a line from Joel Harper's Jungle poem. "Not every man comes home, but some find their way back in the strings of another." Ernest went home that evening with a quiet in his chest, not the haunted silence of decades past, but something clean, still, like the space left behind when a story finishes exactly where it should. That night, for the first time in 50 years, he slept without dreaming of gunfire or thick jungle shadows. The violin case rested beside his bed, closed but no longer waiting. Because the promise had been kept. Because the music had spoken. Because someone somewhere had listened. And that was enough.